there were 12 Catholics, not a dozen Catholic families, a dozen Catholics on McGuire Settlement, which was a 1,200-acre parcel of land near the summit of the Allegheny Mountains. There were Protestants there as well. Now, Mrs. Burgoon, who was in contact with all these Catholics, decided that she wanted to die a Catholic. And they wrote to Bishop Carroll to send a priest out so that she could get received into the church and get all the sacraments, including viaticum and last rites. So they sent Father Gallitzin out to do this. And when he saw the place, after a couple of very awkward first few assignments, where he butted heads with these obstinate lay people who wanted to run boards and things like that, and tell the priest what to do, he decided that this was going to be his life's work. He wanted to come among these people and make it a thriving Catholic settlement. To cut to the chase, Mrs. Burgoon died a Catholic. Father Gallitzin secured the permission of Bishop Carroll that he would begin a settlement, that he would take this settlement, McGuire Settlement, as an assignment. And with his personal fortune, or I should say what he thought was his personal fortune, because that would cause him some problems later, he began to expand the McGuire Settlement into what is now known as the town of Loretto, Pennsylvania. I'm going to read to you a very quick description of what he did to kind of save time here. Eventually, Mitri would have Bishop Carroll's blessing to begin an apostolate among the dozen Catholics of that settlement. It would be his home base for missionary excursions to the Catholics scattered about the region, many of whom had rarely seen a priest before. Some baptisms, for instance, were of 12-year-olds from Catholic families. So rare was a priest in those parts. Father Gallitzin was ideal for this undertaking, as he would be able to apply his own personal monies to building a church, house, and other necessities for the new mission. But he did more than that. He wanted to build a flourishing town in the woods. He funded construction of sawmills, grist mills, and tanneries. He began a general store and established other industries, all for the benefit of his flock, which grew astronomically. From a dozen Catholics at the beginning of his ministry, McGuire Settlement blossomed into the town of Loretto, Gallitzin's name of choice, after Loretto in the Marian Shrine in Italy, wherein dwelt 10,000 Christian souls at the death of its priestly patriarch. Father Gallitzin worked among these people for 41 years, and in those years it went from a dozen Catholics to the town of 10,000 that we just described. And Loretto, Pennsylvania is still a very Catholic area with lots of Catholic churches, lots of religious houses, and so forth. Now, Father Demetrius had a lot to deal with, a lot of problems, a lot of crosses. He had a lot of false accusations from some of his own uncouth people. These were not exactly cultured folk, okay? They were country folk living on the frontier. Remember, this was the edge of the world back in those days, okay? We're talking about the early 19th century. Crossing the Alleghenies was practically going off the edge of the world, okay? The country hadn't yet expanded from sea to shining sea. It was all sort of snuggled along the East Coast here. So to send somebody out to Western Pennsylvania was a very, very long journey, very difficult, went through the mountains and so forth. Father Gallitzin had, as a result, some sort of uncouth pioneer-type folk. He had once had put up a sign in his own private chapel that said, "No spitting on the floor." Okay, so these are the kind of people he was dealing with. And he loved them dearly, just as St. Augustine loved his own people, even though they were apparently somewhat uncouth too. He loved them a great deal. So he was a real pastor, a real shepherd of souls. He was also accused of impurity. False rumors of his impurity circulated because he tried to take a number of girls who were interested in living a more serious, more vibrant Catholic life personally. He tried to put them into a little teaching community so that they could teach in a school that he wanted to found. Well, rumors went about that this was some impure venture on his part, which it certainly wasn't, and sort of ruined the whole thing. He was also a Federalist. He was also a Federalist who was accused of being an anti-American monarchist by some of his people, who were not exactly Federalists. Okay, they were Republican types. So he had some difficulties there as well. In defense of the truth here, he was apolitical. He really wasn't very involved in politics at all. He was much more interested in spiritual affairs. He ran into horrible financial problems because as a Catholic cleric, he found himself cut off from his inheritance. And he funded all of these things that I described before on borrowed money, thinking that when he got his inheritance, he would be able to pay off all these debts. And, of course, his credit was very good because everybody knew that he was a Russian prince and he was going to come into this fantastic inheritance and so forth. But he was totally cut off by Russian law from his inheritance. Not because he was a Catholic, but because he was a Catholic cleric. That cut him off. Because, keep in mind, Russia was schismatic at the time, Orthodox. So this is a serious problem, and he had to go out fundraising, so he had to go find all the rich American Catholics. And after he spoke to all three of them, he didn't have that much money. And eventually, who helped him were the poor Irish who came to the Allegheny Mountains to build the railroad through the Alleghenies to go further out west. They came through for him in spades with sort of little widow's mites, and in spades, literally, because they were using spades.
He did have one other great helper.
Yes, he did. And can you say who that was?
William of Orange.
Who was?
The son of the King of the Netherlands.
Who had been?
His playmate when he was a boy.
Oh my God!
Correct.
Thank you. Do I get the gold star?
You get a star. Yes. So he did get help from William. Yes. They'd grown up together.
Not the one who took over England.
No, the other William. All right. So he's also one of the first Catholic controversialists in the United States. And I want to read to you a little passage from his Catholic controversies. He wrote a book by the name of A Defense of Catholic Principles. And the way that this came to be written was quite interesting. In 1814, there was a national disaster when the Brits invaded and almost burned down Washington, D.C. The president at the time, President Madison, had called for a national day of prayer and humiliation, whereby we would pray and humiliate ourselves before the deity of your own choice and supplicate God for his blessings and so forth. Well, there was a Reverend Mr. Johnson, some sort of Presbyterian or something, who had the same problem that Mitri had, in as much as he was a Federalist and wasn't into all this republicanism and didn't exactly care much about this day of prayer and humiliation, decided that what he would do is use it as an occasion for an anti-Catholic sermon. It was one thing that he and his people could agree on. So he did his best to make the most rip-roaring anti-Catholic sermon filled with all sorts of filthy lies and stuff that he probably made up on the spot. He was so proud of it that he put it in writing and circulated it as a tract. Well, the tract ended up in the hands of our beloved Father Gallitzin, who decided that he was going to set things right in writing. So he gave us what may well be the first English language Catholic work of apologetics in the United States of America, by the name of A Defense of Catholic Principles. He would write two other books, A Letter on the Holy Scriptures and An Appeal to the Protestant Public. But here's a little bit of his Defense of Catholic Principles. For God's sake, dear sir. Now, he's writing this whole thing to this bishop, to this minister, this priest, or what do you call it? Minister of some sort, a Reverend Mr. type. Now, he addresses the whole thing to him, and by the way, it took him like 2 years to respond. And all he did was engage in a series of ad hominems attacking Gallitzin. But he really was totally bowled over. He didn't think any Catholics would react to what he had done. He just sort of thought he could get away with it and not be called in the carpet. But he was most roundly.